Okay. Does everybody have a copy? I have one more here that I don't really need because we're going to be discussing it outside. Picture of it? Oh, sure. I mean, you can have it. I don't need it. We're going to be doing it outside anyways. I really don't need it. I have here also originally, so we're good. Okay, so Parshas Lech Lecha this week. The Hayom Yom, I think it was Shabbos 2 days ago. Hayom Yom said the Parshas Bereshis is an exciting parsha, creation of the world, all these good things. Ending's not so good. Noach is like mostly a negative story with a happy ending. Abraham's born. Lech Lecha is the first parsha where it's like all good. Anyways, so that's this week. Now, in the Sikha that we're learning today, the Rebbe actually, it's something that, the Rebbe says repeatedly many times, and the Rebbe opens up saying that thank you. Does anyone else need a copy? Torah is a means of connecting us to Hashem. Which means that the Torah portion of the week is a particularly, basically engaging with the Torah portion of the week, learning it, studying it is a lot more than just learning. On one hand, everything we learn from the Torah is good. On top of that, it's actually a way of connecting to Hashem. And this is the specific, let's say, within Torah, this is the part that's, let's say, maybe most finely tuned for this week. So learning about the parsha is a way of connecting to Hashem. Fine, that's that. So we are actually starting from paragraph 6, Isvav, which is on page 16. So we have a really, really, really big idea and lesson in this week's parsha. So Parshas Lech Lecha talks about Avram. It talks about the angels coming to Avram and Sarah and telling them, it's Avram's bris, Avram having his circumcision at the age of 99 years old. Avram and Sarah being told at that point that he's 99 and she's 90, that they're going to be having a baby next year, which is understandably, Sarah had a laughing fit because she was like, that's a funny joke. 90 years old, I'm having a baby next year, right? Who wouldn't have that response? Morning, welcome back. So Avram has a bris. Hashem tells him they're going to have a baby. Then Yitzhak's born a year later. And that's basically, right, the parsha, let's say in a nutshell, the big drama of the parsha. Now, Hashem told Avram at around this point that, you're going to have another son, and this son is, going to be your nachas. Does everyone know what nachas is? Right, nachas is one of those words that you can't really translate. I saw a very cute magnet on the fridge in someone's kitchen once. It says nachas is hereditary. You get it from your kids. Nachas is that pleasure, satisfaction, right, that we get from children, from seeing them grow, develop, live full lives, live the way they should be living, etc. And so Hashem said to Avram, you're going to have your son, Yishmael, not the most nachas. You could have had maybe more nachas. So, I'm going to give you another son, Yitzhak. And Yitzchak's really going to give you nachas. Give Yitzhak your korei l'chazar. It says that Yitzhak is going to be like, literally, through Yitzhak will be named, or your offspring will be named for or attributed to Yitzhak, which doesn't mean that Avram's not going to have offspring through Yishmael. Avram might end up actually having a far greater number of offspring from Yishmael than from Yitzhak. But the offspring that are going to be named for Avram, that are going to be Avram's nachas, that are going to be following the way of Avram, and the offspring coming through Yitzhak. So what did Avram respond to that when Hashem said that? Avram could have said, oh, thank you. Like, yeah, that sounds good. I'll take it. Avram didn't say that. Avram said, I already have a son. I have Ishmael. Yes, maybe he's not giving me the most nachas. Why do you need to give me another son? Why don't you just give me a bracha or a blessing that Yishmael should redirect and should live the way that he should live, and that I should get my nachas from Yishmael. What can Hashem not make Avram have nachas through Yishmael? He could. So why does he need to give him a different son? So Avram says, "Thank you, but you could just Lu Yishmael Yichya lefanecha," were his words. If only Yishmael would live before you, would live the way he's supposed to, and live his life the way he should be living it, ideally. But that would be enough. I don't need another son. He said, Lu Yishmael Yichya lefanecha, just make Yishmael be good. It's not saying I don't want more children. But if the thing Hashem is saying to him is, I want you to have a lot of nachas, and Yishmael's not giving you a lot of nachas, I'll give you another son, and then you'll have a lot of nachas. It's this is kind of random, but I just dealt with something similar, so it's on my mind. Let's say you have a computer at work, and your computer dies off of work or pleasure, whatever. Your phone, right? You have your phone, your smartphone, it crashes, and you're in big trouble. And so what are you going to do? I don't know. I've got to go get a new phone. And what if someone says to you, hang on, you don't need a new phone? That's a known thing. Just reset your phone, do this, that, and the other, and it's going to be back to perfectly normal. You don't need a new phone. What are you going to say? You say, thank you, amazing. You saved me the hassle of having to go buy a new phone, right? That's basically what Avram was saying. He's saying, I don't need another son. You want to give me nachas, just give me nachas through Yishmael. What do I need a new kid to have nachas? I'm not saying he doesn't want more children, but he's saying, is it not possible to have nachas through Yishmael? Make sense? So then Hashem responds and says, no. Yitzhak and Yishmael is two different things. Yishmael is Yishmael, ki b'Yitzhak yikar lecha zera. For you to have what I'm promising you, that has to be through Yitzhak. It doesn't work through Yishmael. Yitzhak and Yishmael are completely different people. It's not just the behavior. Could Hashem... Well, there are a few things. First of all, right, the Gemara says, Hakol bidei shamayim chutz mi yireh shamayim. Everything is in the hands of heaven. Everything is under Hashem's control, chutz mi yireh shamayim, except for whether or not we are God-fearing. Hashem doesn't make us do good. Hashem creates our nature. Hashem creates our struggles. Hashem gives us what we need to overcome the struggles, and then Hashem is about what we decide to do. So Hashem, isn't, on one hand, Hashem can't guarantee any outcome for any person. That being said, could Yishmael live a good life? Yeah, he could. But what Hashem tells Avram is, what I'm promising you now is a lot more than just getting nachas from seeing your son do the right things. That could happen with Yishmael. I'm promising you something altogether different. And the thing that I'm promising you now, that can only come from Yitzhak. That can't come from Yishmael. Yes, Yishmael could live a good life and give you nachas, but I'm offering you something altogether different. Again, going back to the smartphone analogy, would say, let someone has a smartphone that's all messed up, and then someone says to them, oh, there's a new generation phone out, and the person's like, I don't need a new generation phone just to fix my phone. I'll say, well, we could fix your phone, but the new phone that just came out has a whole new world. It has artificial intelligence, and all these kind of things that didn't even exist when your phone was made. Right, so Hashem's telling Avram, Yishmael could give you nachas, but what I'm offering you here with Yitzhak is a whole different ballgame. It's something that it is not applicable to Yishmael. Separate thing. It's a different beast. So the question is, what is that? Okay, yes, Yitzhak gave Avram more nachas than Yishmael did, but what is it about Yitzhak that makes him a whole different category, that whatever it was that Hashem gave Avram through Yitzhak in terms of nachas and offspring in future generations, that, it's like Yishmael didn't have the hardware to be able to do that, right? That would be the metaphor, right? If there's a new iOS update, right? Your phones get new updates. Android has new OS updates. iPhones have new OS updates. Often what happens is eventually, there's a generational gap in the phones. And if you have an iPhone 11 and there's a new OS update that's, that they released on iPhone 12, you can update your iPhone 11 with the new OS as well. It's fine. You might not be able to put that OS on an iPhone 5 though, right? Because at a certain point, there's just a generational gap. There's a different hardware, and the hardware of an iPhone 5 can't run iOS 15. Right, so there was something that the whole package that was being given, Hashem was giving Avram through Yitzhak, it couldn't run on Yishmael's hardware. Yishmael wasn't a person in which that could happen. So the question is, what is that? What was it that, what was this new OS? What was it that Hashem was offering, was giving Yitzhak now, was giving to Avram? Avram decided to have a bris at 99 years old, which is a huge deal, to say the least, right? For any mature person who has a say in the matter to choose to be circumcised, it's a big deal, right? And that was at 99 years old. We're talking about someone who, is not a spring chicken, as they say. So Avram did that, and sort of, I don't know if you would say the reward, but the outcome of that, it's part reward, part cause and effect, is that Hashem says, now you did that, this is a new part, a new stage in our relationship, and now I'm giving something you a whole new ballgame. I'm giving you something different in terms of offspring and nachas in future generations. And because that iOS can't run on, son version Yishmael, I'm going to have to give you son version Yitzhak so that it could be possible, is basically what happened. So he says, I'm giving you a new son, Yitzhak. So when Avram said, well, just make Yishmael, it's like, no, this is a whole different ballgame. This doesn't work with Yishmael. This is different hardware. So what are the big differences? So there are three things we need, or two things, let's say broadly, we need to understand. What are the differences between Yitzhak and Yishmael? What is it that Hashem is giving Avram now, that the ways in which Yitzhak was special from Yishmael mean that Yitzhak is the only one through who this is possible and not Yishmael? Yeah, we're clear so far? Everything making sense? So let's look at really two big differences between Yishmael and Yitzhak. I mean, obviously there are tons of differences. Now let's talk about, are there things that strike you very obviously, if you know the stories of Yishmael and of Yitzhak, things that are like, really strike you as like, yeah, that's a fundamental difference between the two of them? We're not talking about their behavior, we're talking about the whole story as a person. Number one is, right, what did we say when Hashem told Avram and Sarah that they're going to have a baby next year? What did Sarah do? She said, haha, funny joke, right? It's impossible. It is technically impossible. And the Torah tells us, it's not saying that, at that time when Sarah was 90 years old, women had menopause at 120, so she was still able to have a baby. It doesn't say that. The Torah tells us that Sarah was very much post-menopausal, and she then had a complete shift, and at 90 years old, somehow her body just reverted back 50 years in time, 60 years in time, and all of a sudden, she was young and healthy and able to have a baby at 90 years old. That's a technical impossibility, right? So Yitzchak's birth was supernatural or extra natural. The birth of Yitzhak, the whole story of the birth of Yitzhak from before conception, the fact that his mother was in a position to be able to conceive was technically impossible and was the result of an explicit miracle. The entire story of Yitzhak's birth from way before conception was, let's say, non-natural. Yishmael was a normal kid who was born. His mother gave birth. Doesn't say anywhere that Hagar was a super old lady when Yishmael was born. Avram was pretty old, right? But there's no really biological fundamentals that stop a man from being able to generate offspring, right? Men don't have menopause. Women do. So, Avram was old. Is it common that 87-year-old men, 86-year-old men have babies? Even the ones that have 25-year-old wives? Not very common. And, maybe some technical issues, but it's not impossible. So Yishmael had a normal natural birth. Yes, father was pretty old. Okay, and wasn't a miracle. There was nothing miraculous about his birth. The entire story of Yitzhak's existence from a year pre-conception was completely non-natural. So the existence of even the idea of Yitzhak, let alone Yitzhak as a living entity, the existence of the idea of a child of Avram and Sarah when he was 100 and she was 91 years old is unnatural, is non-natural. It's a technical impossibility according to nature. The entire story of Yitzhak is a extra-natural story. It takes place in a space that is not running on the software of nature, right? That's running in a different OS. It's the whole story of Yitzhak is running in a separate timeline, not really time, but a separate pathway of reality that's not running according to nature. The whole existence of Yitzhak is not natural. And the reason I keep saying not natural, I originally said supernatural and then I said extra natural, right? What's the difference between super means above, right? The word super technically means above. Supernatural means above nature. But the point is, it is above nature, but the point I think is bigger than that. It's not just, it's a miracle. So then I moved to extra natural. What does extra mean? Outside, technically. Extraterrestrial means outside of whatever it is, outside the planet, outside whatever. So extra natural means it's not just, this is so big and powerful, it's even higher than nature. It's outside of nature. It's in a different reality. Now, did Yitzhak live in this world? He did. But the laws that were governing the story and the existence of Yitzhak were not the laws of physical nature. He was running on a separate track. His story was a story that wasn't subject to physical nature, period, clearly. Because according to physical nature, his entire story was not conceptually possible. So, number one, Yishmael had some interesting things about him and his story, and his father was very old, and his father was Avram Avinu, a big deal. And Yitzhak's entire story, the entire story of the concept of Yitzhak, from its very, very beginning, happened outside of the laws of nature, outside the system of nature. Yeah, makes sense so far? By the way, side note, and I think I've said this before, but we have some new people, and in case I haven't said it for a while, there might be more people who haven't heard this. Very important rule. It says in the second chapter of Pirkei Avos, of ethics, Lo habaishon lamed, one who is bashful does not learn. If at any point you have questions, please ask them. Number one, there's no such thing as a bad question because questions are opportunities to learn, which is an objectively good thing. Number two is because sometimes we feel like we have a question, but it's like, I don't know, I don't want to stick out. I don't want everyone to think I'm dumb. Or whatever. I'm at the front of the room and I can see all your faces. And I know, as a rule, I teach a lot. I sit at the front of lots of classrooms. Almost every time someone asks a question, I see multiple other faces in the room, either nodding or sighing relief, because there's almost always multiple other people in the room with the same question you didn't want to ask. And not only are you doing yourself a favor by asking, you're doing plenty of other people a favor by asking, because lots of people generally have the same question. So you're almost never going to be the only person with a question. If you ever have a question, speak up and ask it. Okay. So that's number one. Number two is, number one is, let's say, right, the foundation of the story. The foundation of Yishmael's story, of the idea even of Yishmael, is natural, relatively normal. The whole foundation of the story of Yitzhak is unnatural. It's something that Hashem engineered outside of the laws of nature that he created, by which everything in the world is generally managed. Number two, another big difference about Yitzhak and Yishmael is when Hashem told Avram to circumcise himself, Hashem at the same time told Avram to circumcise his offspring, his household, and to set up a practice, a mitzvah, that from now on all of his offspring should be circumcised. Yitzhak was born, should be circumcised on the 8th day. After that point, Yitzhak was born a year later. Yitzhak was circumcised on the 8th day of his life. Of his life.
Okay. Again, please.
Yitzhak was circumcised on the 8th day of his life, when he was 7 days old, on the 8th day, Yom HaShmini, Shel HaChaim Shelo. Yishmael was already 13 years old when Hashem told Avram about this. So Yishmael was circumcised at 13 years old. Which means that Yishmael had a part in this, Yishmael had a say in this. Now, on one hand, props to Yishmael, right? Because he could have put up a fight, he could have run away, he could have kicked and screamed and said no and run off. And he didn't, he agreed, which is a huge deal. Like major props to Ishmael for that. Yitzhak didn't do that. Yitzhak can't claim, Yitzhak could say, well, I had a bris at 8 days old, and Yishmael's like, yeah, well, you didn't choose that, did you? You didn't have a say, did you? I did. Yishmael agreed to undergo that, and Yitzhak didn't. So there's something to be said for, Yishmael's preparedness to do that and to go through that. That being said, at the same time, conceptually, there's something very special about Yitzhak having the bris at 8 days old, which wasn't there which was absent from Yishmael's consent to have a bris at 13 years old. And there's a lot of nuance here. I hope I'm going to be able to do it justice. So there's a lot of value. And, I'd want to emphasize this and make sure that we're respecting this and we're not downplaying it. There's a huge amount of value in people intentionally, consciously deciding to do good things. Right? And that's why, that's a part of, it says in multiple places, things, and there are many variations of it, but along the lines of, someone who is let's say a Baal Teshuvah, someone who wasn't previously living a life of Torah and mitzvahs and then redirects their life and decides intentionally to change their lifestyle and to live a life of Torah and mitzvahs going forward. Tzaddikim Gemurim Einim Yechilim Lamu, they are standing in a place that a tzaddik gomor, a person who has a spotless, clean record, could never reach. And there are a number of reasons of this. Part of it is someone who grew up in a Torah and mitzvahs home, and it's all they know and it's all they experience, and they were brought up with it their whole life. It's a beautiful thing and it's a valuable thing. But the value of them doing a mitzvah, which is really all they know, in contrast to the value of someone doing a mitzvah when they know lots of other things and they've experienced lots of other things. And it's an enormous challenge for them because they know what else is out there and they know exactly how tasty it is to not do this mitzvah, tasty either literally or metaphorically, or figuratively, better than metaphorically, either literally or figuratively, how appealing and how much, how good it can be to live a life not doing this mitzvah, and they choose to do it anyway, which they're making a choice, right? As opposed to someone coming from a different background with a wide variety of other experiences. It's a huge deal. So when someone decides to do something consciously, as opposed to just doing it by rote, just doing it without it being a real decision, let's say, is a big deal. And there's infinite value in the intentionality of doing something as a decision and as a choice. Now, I'm just thinking about how to go about this to really bring out the value. Now, okay, so I think we're going to broaden this a little. I wasn't really planning on doing this just because I hadn't thought of it yet, but I think we should. for a number of reasons. Yes, please do.
Basically, so we see Yitzhak and Ishmael, they have like the same parents, let's say, and we see that they go in different directions. So I'm thinking more like nowadays, like kids with the same parents, they like all of them, even if they have like different personalities, they are like inside like that Torah mitzvahs type of like family. So that you kind of work with that personalities, like if this kid is like not so well behaved or like this kid is more well behaved, all of them are like inside of the same bubble. So like with Ishmael and Yitzhak, we see like they do totally different paths. Like,
Well, so what we're talking about is, and we're going to bring it all together. Remember, Yishmael, yes, he was Avram's son, but he wasn't Sarah's son, and he was born in a natural way. It's going to all come together because what you're saying is right. And the points that we're getting to try to emphasize is the fact that Yitzhak and Yishmael are not like, first of all, you could have people who grow up in the same house who have very different personal natures. And the bottom line is, nature is real, right? And the fact that two people are in the same external circumstances, right? At the end of the day, our internal circumstances are more important and have a greater influence than our external circumstances, right? If someone is by nature positive and optimistic and they just see the good in it because that's just the way they're created, first of all, super lucky. Number two, they might get punched in the face and they'll smile and see the positive in it, right? And someone else who is just born with a nature that's negative, more pessimistic, more, bitter, etc., and someone drops $1 million cash in their lap and they find a way to kvetch about it. Now, yes, we all have the ability to work on ourselves and change these things, etc. That being said, let's say these two people, are relatively young. They're still children. They haven't had a chance to work on it and develop yet. And one kid is maybe getting beaten up all the time, but because of his nature, he just smiles and thinks life's amazing. And the other one is getting, all kinds of good things happen to them and they just are having a miserable time because they have a bitter disposition by nature. Which one has a better life? The first one has a better life, even though he's getting beaten up, because at the end of the day, he's happy or he's having a better experience, right? So our internal circumstances at the end of the day are actually more important than our external circumstances. A strong set of internal circumstances, having a naturally positive disposition and perspective, can mean that our lived experience will be more pleasant even with worse external circumstances, right? So people can grow up in the same home, and if one just has a more difficult, complicated nature, that might have more impact over their experience than their home environment, right? So that's number one. I just want to emphasize the importance of that, of respecting the differences in people's natures and dispositions, because it's very important. It's a big deal. On top of that, here, what we're talking about is that Yitzhak and Yishmael's, everything was different from the outside, from the ground up. So we're working towards clarifying those differences. So now, generally speaking, let's say our relationship with Hashem. Is everyone familiar with the term Kabbalas oil? Yeah? Kabbalas oil, literally oil, the word oil in Hebrew, Aleph Vav Lamed, means a yoke, right? Y-O-K-E, not Y-O-L-K, not the yellow part of a name. A yoke, what it means, what this word refers to, because a lot of people talk about Kabbalas oil and accepting the yoke of heaven and don't actually understand don't even know what the word yoke literally means. So I'm going to try to explain it. I just want to get the desk and the chair on the desk out of the way. Sorry about that. Now, this is something that practically is not so relevant today. Baruch Hashem, we have technology, right? What happens on a farm today when someone needs to plow a field? It's still a thing, right? We all eat bread. Bread is made out of flour, which comes from wheat. Wheat grows from the ground. The ground had to have been plowed and turned and broken up for produce to have been planted and to have grown. So we talk about plowing the ground. It sounds like some old-fashioned thing. We would only be alive today. We're only alive today because plowing fields still happens. That being said, plowing fields today looks very different to the way it used to look. I mean, for 100, I don't know about 100, but for 50 years already, plowing a field looked like, plowing a field used to look like taking a physical blade and pulling it through the ground and tearing it up. For 50 years already, plowing the ground looks like turning a key in an engine, sitting down in the tractor, pushing the gas pedal, and it just tears the place up. These days, for all we know, I wouldn't be surprised if plowing the ground consists of pulling out your phone, opening the app, hitting start, and some machine that's managed by the app on your phone over Wi-Fi just starts plowing. Maybe, I don't know, could be, right? The bottom line is plowing the, sorry? Yeah, like automated, it's automated? Yeah. Right, I didn't know, but I figured, right? So, but how did plowing a field, what did it look like 2,000 years ago, 4,000 years ago, 5,000 years ago, right? To plant, like think about just one person, think about how much bread, if one, let's say that you have a family, right? I don't know, you have 5 people living in a house, 8 people, 10 people, you know, 3,000 years ago, people had, families tended to be bigger, let's leave it at that, than they do today on average. If someone has a family of 10 people in their house, they need a lot of bread over the course of a year, which means you need to be able to produce a lot of flour over the course of a year. And you can't just plant it every day, right? There are seasons, which means you need to be planting a very large amount of wheat for your family during the planting season, so you have enough to last until next planting season, which means you need to plow a lot of ground, and the ground can get very hard. And they didn't have tractors. And for one person to do all of that plowing with a shovel, at best, it's going to be extraordinarily difficult. It might not even be feasible. So people tend to figure out solutions to challenges when they need to. So we came up with the plow and the idea of a yoke, and using an animal, a strong animal like a cow or a donkey or something to pull the plow. So what do? They'll get a plow, they'll make a blade that would go into the ground, big piece of metal with the blade underneath. Then they would put a couple of metal bars on front of it, maybe attach it to some straps. They would get a strong animal, a cow, a donkey, something, put it in front. Now they needed to attach the plow to the animal. Right? How do you attach a plow to an animal? They're not stitching it in, they're not implanting it. So what do? Very simple. They came up with this idea. They would make out of like solid, heavy wood, a U-shaped piece of wood that was really strong. They would put it over the neck of the animal, and behind the neck are the shoulders. So this thing was designed to fit over the neck, but it was in front of the shoulders, and it wasn't big enough for the shoulders to go through. Now, if you drop that over the neck of the animal, and then you attach the plow to that wood, right, so you have the yoke, which looks like this. Then you have attached to that yoke a couple of poles or leather straps that are attached to, a plow with a blade at the bottom. I'm keeping it simple, especially because the more complicated I make this picture, the worse it's going to be, right? And then you take this piece and you drop it over the cow's neck or the donkey's neck. And now when the animal wants to push forward, because the yoke is over its neck, it's in front of its shoulders are going to push forward. It doesn't have a choice. It can't slip through. If it wants to move forward, it's going to be pulling the yoke. And the yoke, this piece here is called the yoke. When you pull the yoke, you pull the plow and the ground gets torn up. Right? So that's how plowing of fields happened for thousands of years. So this is called a yoke. Now, what's the function of the yoke in this picture? The point of the yoke is basically the moment you put that yoke over the neck of the animal, it no longer has a choice, right? It is now compelled to pull that plow. If it wants to move, it's going to be pulling the plow. It doesn't have a choice. It doesn't have the option of moving forward without pulling the plow. The yoke took away that choice and made it involuntary. There's no decision involved, no choice, sorry. So the idea of what the yoke represents in Kabbalah Sol Nachal Shamayim is a yoke means something which compels you to comply. It takes away your option of saying no. It forces you to do the work. Sorry? זה הבנת בכלל? כן. אז זה נקרא אור. כן. אז כשיש אור על גבי הצוואר של הבהמה, הבהמה לא יכולה לבחור לא לעשות את העבודה. אם הבהמה רוצה ללכת, העול נמצא שם, ואם הבהמה רוצה ללכת, הבהמה מחויבת להמשיך את הפעל. נכון. אז העול removes מסיר את עניין הבחירה. The question is, what does that mean in the context of our relationship with Hashem? Because our life, it's fundamental to our purpose and our life and the meaning of everything we do that we do have choice. So what does it mean that there's a yoke that takes away our choice? And one of the operative words here is what there was a word before. Oh, what did we say? Kabbalas Olma Hashem. Accepting the yoke. So let's say, right, hypothetically, because it doesn't actually make sense in reality, but let's say there was an animal, right? And the animal says to the farmer, you know, I really want to plow your fields for you. Like I like you, I want to do this work. The bottom line is I know my nature, and that is that when we get out in the field and I have to pull the plow, I'm not going to want to do it. I'm going to try to resist, and I'm going to try to run away. I don't want that to happen. Now I'm speaking to you rationally. I don't want to do that, but I know that when the time comes, I'm not going to be able to help it. So how about this? How about you take a yoke, you put the plow on the yoke, when we get there, you drop it over my neck, and I want you to do that because I want to do the work now, and I'm telling you now that I want you to do that so that when we get there, I'll end up having to do the work and I won't have a choice. And when we get home later, I'll appreciate it because I'll remember that that's really what I wanted to do. It's just when we get out there to do it, it's so hard that I'll resist it even though I don't really want to. Right? That's Kabbalas Ol. It's voluntarily accepting the yoke. The difference between that analogy, that metaphor with the animal and what it is for us is, for us, it's a lot more nuanced. Right? With the animal, once the yoke is there, the animal literally doesn't have a choice. So now we've got to translate that back to our experience because we do always have a choice. That being said, let's say, for example, right, someone who keeps kosher, maybe someone who, to make it more simple, and then we'll move up levels of complexity and nuance. Someone who always kept kosher, and it's all they know. And they walk down the street and they see something that looks really delicious and it's not kosher. Like, how hard is it for them? Chances are it's not that hard, right? It's like, it's not even a thing. It's like, that's not kosher. It's not part of my life. There's nothing to talk about, whatever, big deal. Okay, does that look up? They can stand there and happily observe and say, wow, that looks really good. Next, they forgot about it. But let's say there's someone who doesn't keep kosher and is kind of working on trying, and they're taking it minute by minute, and they see that and it's like, the heart rate goes up and they're struggling. It's like, should I eat it? Should I not eat it? It could be a really, really, really big deal. Yeah? It's going to be a huge challenge for them because they could. The other person, it's like, it's nothing to talk about. For this person, like, it is something to talk about. I ate that yesterday. I'm trying not to eat it today. It's really delicious. What am I going to do? That now, it's not just two different people with two different histories. Let's say that person 10 years down the line, let's say that they struggle, they go through it, they get to a point where they make a rock solid commitment to keep kosher. It's like, that's it. I keep kosher. I don't eat that anymore. Down the road, they pass that. Is it going to be the same struggle for them now that it was back then? It's probably going to be somewhat more of a thing than it is for someone who never experienced it because they know what it is. But it's like, it's not part of their life. For them already, they're in a situation with like, it's not a thing, it's not a question, it's not an option. As the moment something's not an option, 99% of the challenge is gone, right? As long as we're considering, or, I really don't want to, but I could, am I going to, am I not going to? That's where it becomes painfully difficult. If we're in a mindset in which like, I don't do that, it's not an option, it's not a part of my life, 99.9% of the challenge is already gone. Right, so a person who is in that situation, technically speaking, let's go back to the original, more extreme example. A person who grew up in a Torah mitzvah's home, never ever thought of, like, it never occurred to them, the concept of eating not kosher food to them is just like some random thing that some other people do. Could they technically eat the non-kosher food if they want to? They could. When they pass that food and don't eat it, is it really a decision to not eat it? Technically it is, because they technically could. It's not really a decision. The decision's already made that that's not a part of their life. So because the decision has been made that that's not part of my life, this in and of itself isn't really a decision that they have to make right now. It's done already. It's off the menu. Now, And it might be the same thing, not only with kosher. Let's say a person's trying to eat, a healthier diet. A person says, like there are certain foods that I eat, I enjoy, they're really not good for me. I'm going to try to just, there's a handful of foods I really should stop eating. I could stop eating. I don't really need them. I'm going to try to stop. And as long as I'm going to try to stop, and then they see it and it's like, I'll eat less. Let's say a person says, I'm going to eat less of it, right? This is going to make it even harder. The moment you say, I'm going to have less of it, each time it's like, should I, this time, come on, this time, yeah, next time I won't. And next time it's like, I'm going to eat less. Now I'm going to have it, and next time I won't. And what happens? They end up having the same amount. Because it's really hard when you could. If a person says, I don't eat that anymore, now obviously it's not as simple as doing that, but if a person gets into a mindset in which they don't eat that anymore, when the food's in front of them, it's much less of a challenge. Because, if you walk into someone really likes that food, they go into a restaurant, it's like, oh, do I order it or not? They, they make it really well here. Do I order it or not? It's like, it's a big challenge. You go into a restaurant where it's not on the menu, it's not a challenge because it's not an option, right? So we can, to a degree in our lives, remove it from the menu if we just change our mindset. It's like, that's something I don't do. Yes, it's easier said than done, but we can do it. So when we change into a mindset where that's not something I do, we've removed it from the menu, it's now we're not making the decision each time because we've already made a blanket decision that it's not on the menu. We're not making the decision anymore. Now, what Kabbalah Soul is, it's accepting the yoke, which is a bit of an irony here because the yoke is something that takes away our choice. We're like the animal that says, put that on my neck so I won't mess up. It's a person accepting that. Now, what does that look like in reality? What Kabbalah Soul actually means is making an unconditional commitment to do what Hashem says, when Hashem says, how Hashem says. Now, yes, again, easier said than done. But it depends what we mean when we say that. Because if a person says, you know what, I'm stuck, like new approach, I always try to do the right thing and it's always a struggle. But hypothetically, and again, it's it's easier said than done, but there is a certain shift that sometimes happens in people. They work on it, maybe they slip into it and then there's a drastic change. The shift that happens is if we can make an unconditional commitment to do the right thing, then when something comes up, it's like the person who says, I now keep kosher, period. It's a fact. When I see something non-kosher, do I know how it tastes? Yes. Would I enjoy it if I ate it? Yes. Is it an option? No. I made a commitment. I don't do that. It's not a thing. And once a person really steps into that commitment and that becomes who they are, it's not really a struggle anymore for the most part. Kabbalah Soul means I'm making a commitment that when something comes up, I'm going to do what I'm supposed to do. It's not a question of should I yes, should I no. It's not a question of how hard is it. It's not a question of how badly do I want to. It's a commitment. I will do the right thing. Something comes up, one question. What's the right thing to do? Do it. Yes, on one hand, that's very much easier said than done. That being said, think about the person, the life of the person who keeps kosher versus the life of the person who's trying to eat less non-kosher food and keeps on seeing things that they like and keeps on having to struggle with it every time. Whose life is easier? The person who keeps kosher's life is much easier than the other person. Much easier. Why? Because the moment that commitment became real and they shifted from a person who's trying not to eat non-kosher foods to a person who keeps kosher, the individual things stopped being individual challenges because there was a commitment that overrode all of that and the decision's already made. So Kabbalah Soul Malchus Shamayim means accepting a yoke, accepting upon ourselves something which removes the choice. What removes the choice? An unconditional commitment to do the right thing. I now became a person who does the right thing. I became a person who keeps kosher. Those individual instances of not kosher are not a struggle anymore. I became a person, I committed to be a person who does the right thing. Something comes up that's not right. It might be delicious. It might be exciting. It might be super fun. It might feel amazing. I'm not a person who does that. Simple, hypothetically, right? So Kabbalah Soul means accepting the yoke of heaven, i.e. accepting voluntarily upon ourselves an unconditional commitment to do the right thing. And then that commitment removes the option of doing the wrong thing each time because we made a commitment that that's not who we are. That's what Kabbalah Soul means. Accepting the yoke, accepting something that removes the other option, that removes the choice, accepting something that voluntarily accepting upon ourselves something which going forward will compel us to behave a certain way. So is it literally a yoke? A person who decides, you know what, yeah, I'm doing the right thing, Kabbalah Soul.
So it's decision.
It's a decision, but tchila. It's a decision. שמעכשיו והלאה, אני לא בוחר, אני רק עושה מה שאני צריך. So it's a decision that removes all the decisions going forward. Not literally, but in mindset. Right? It doesn't actually take away the decision. A person, like I said, a person who keeps kosher could eat not kosher if they want to. It's just not even a thing for them. They have their minds they're in a different mindset. So that not kosher is not a thing.
Are they already living in Kabbalah?
Again, the reality of it is not as simple as that. But let's say, for example, a person who grew up, Torah mitzvahs, showing Torah mitzvahs, and this is all they know, and it's what they do. It's like, to a degree, there is some Kabbalah Soul built into their lifestyle. So why is it that they don't eat kosher? Because it's not even a thing. Why is it that they don't break Shabbos? It's not even a thing. Now, yes, everybody has their own things, obviously. But right, when it comes to these big things, let's say, for example, it's like, it's not even a thing. Kabbalah Soul means I decide, I commit, which means that from now on, wrong things are just not even a thing. Something comes up, that's interesting. I have Kabbalah Soul, I accepted this commitment, I have a yoke on my neck, I will only do the right thing as a result of that commitment. So the actual oil, the actual yoke that compels us is the commitment that we voluntarily made. Right, but it's a mindset. It's a mindset in which I don't decide, when I face a challenge, I don't decide, should I do the right thing or should I do the wrong thing? I'm a person who does the right thing because that's who I am. That's the relationship I have with Hashem. Now, whilst on one hand, the achievement of overcoming something that's a difficult challenge is huge, there's something very, very special about being in a mindset in which I don't have to choose because I've already committed 100%. I've already bought in 100%, unconditional. I don't choose anymore. So the reason that this person's not choosing is not because it's not that they're missing out on the choice. In some sense, to a degree they are, but it's because they've already generated for themselves something that's way bigger that completely overtakes that. So a person who has a connection with or a relationship with Hashem in which it's, I do the right thing because I've taken my relationship to a point that I bought in 100%, I committed 100%, so that the individual decisions are not even decisions anymore. It's not less of a decision. They've made an infinitely greater decision that takes over everything. And now think about the dynamics of that relationship with Hashem. It's not less. It's very special and unique. There's a real, it's not just because of the fact that they made a bigger decision. It's also the fact that there's something they have here which is beyond decisions. This person has now stepped into a relationship with Hashem where, as a result of their buy-in and their commitment, they have a connection with Hashem which is beyond decisions. There are no decisions messing this up. This is something that we have that has now been protected from decisions, protected from mistakes. This is something unbreakable. Hypothetically, right? Obviously, when it comes to Kabbalah Soul in reality, we could get into mindsets of Kabbalah Soul and maybe slip out of them if we stop working.
So Kabbalah Soul is everything or nothing?
B'inyan, Ken. If a person says, I have Kabbalah Soul for all of these things, but that thing, I don't know, not really. אז זה לא Kabbalah Soul.
אז קבלת תורה זה צדיק.
זה לא צדיק, זה בינדי. But that's b'inyan. Now, that being said, right, so just to elaborate in case anyone wasn't following the Hebrew, Kabbalah Soul conceptually is 100% all or nothing buying. If I commit to 99.9% of things and one thing, I'm like, you know what, that one thing I'm keeping for myself, I'm just going to do that one thing the way I want, 999 other things I'm doing right, that's not Kabbalah Soul. I'm choosing those things and not that thing, which means I haven't made an unconditional commitment.
Wait, I thought that Kabbalah Soul was like individually, like according to each subject. Like it could be Kabbalah Soul according like to one thing. Like I don't know, for example, kashrus, whatever.
Okay, so
it's like step by step. Isn't it? Doesn't work.
Right.
I have Kabbalah Soul.
So that's the next part of. That's exactly where I'm going. So when a person, let's say, again, we have to clarify the differences between the way things are as concepts and the way they are in reality, right? Let's say, instead of saying we all are, I'll speak for myself and say I'm very far from perfect, right? Presumably, most of us are not quite perfect yet. And presumably, most of us have more than one thing we need to perfect before we get there. We can't do everything at once, right? There's no such thing as doing everything at once. You try to do everything at once, you do nothing. You need to figure out, what am I putting my effort into? What am I focusing on? Right? So when a person says, you know what, like I'm going to choose this one thing and I'm going to have Kabbalah all about kashrus, right? I'm going to take my kashrus, I'm going to really work on it. If a person's coming from a place where they didn't have any of it, you can't do everything at once. So a person, be'inyan, in the mind, conceptually, a person saying, you know what, I'm committing to do everything. But the reality is I need to get there. So I'm choosing one thing, I'm committing to going all the way with this one thing. The reason I'm committing to this one thing and not everything is because I want to actually get there. So I'm going to commit to one thing, and I commit to all those things. I'm just not up to working on those things yet. Right? It's very different than saying, I commit to that. Yeah, I don't commit to that. Is different to saying, I commit to working on this because this is what I'm capable of working on right now, and that's on my roadmap. I'm just not up to it yet. Yeah, the difference makes sense?
Yes.
Did you want to ask something?
Because I mean, we are on the way, right?
Yeah, Kabbalah. It's a good question.
I mean,
This is
as students, like we don't know everything.
So what does Kabbalah so means? It means זה החלטה לעשות כל מה שמחויבים לעשות. מה שאני לא יודע לעשות, אני לא מחויב. מה שאני לא יכול לעשות, אני לא מחויב.
But at the moment we know, we can.
Correct.
Because we.
Well, it's more, in reality, it's more than just know. The moment we know something and we're capable of doing it, we're obligated to do it, right? Someone might learn a whole lot. Imagine someone who's coming from, I don't know to what degree everyone needs to imagine, but someone who's coming from a life where there's no Torah mitzvahs. And they sit and learn, and they quickly learn a whole lot of stuff, right? Just keeping kosher is like, for someone who's coming from zero concept of kashrus, you can learn about kashrus a lot more quickly than you can just make that shift in your life, boom. Right? You can read a blog post that tells you all the fundamentals of kashrus. I don't know how realistic it is that any human being is going to shift over the course of 45 minutes of reading a blog post from not knowing what kosher is to being completely kosher observant. It's not reality. As long as we are obligated to do what we have the capacity to do, which means what we know about and what is within our capacity as a human being. And sometimes we have to say, you know what, I know about all these things. I need to do them all. I want to do them all. I just can't do it all at once. So I'm going to pick something that's a priority. I'm going to work on that. Not because I'm not accepting and committing to that. I commit to everything. The way I'm going to get there is to work on it one step at a time. Right? So we're only obligated or required or expected to do what we're able to do. Part of being able to do something is knowing about it. If we don't know, we're not able to do it because we don't know about it. Another part of that is, what do we have the physical capacity to actually, the rate at which we have the capacity to change. And as long as we're working and we're doing what we can, we're doing what we're supposed to, and we'll get there. Right? We're not capable of just doing everything we know about all at once. That's not reality. So אנחנו מחויבים לעשות מה שאנחנו יכולים לעשות. Anything that's beyond our abilities, אנחנו לא מחויבים. אנחנו מחויבים להגיע שמה, לעבוד להגיע שמה, אבל עכשיו אנחנו לא מחויבים. Yeah, makes sense? So, okay, right. So we just had a bunch of questions about Kabbalah Soul. So the concept of Kabbalah Soul, the concept of the relation of Kabbalah Soul is ultimately, conceptually, it makes for a relationship with Hashem that is beyond decisions. It's beyond choices. That's not inferior. It's something that's deeper and more profound and special. Now, coming back to Yitzhak and Yishmael. Yes, Yishmael voluntarily accepted the responsibility to have a bris at 13 years old, which is massive. The fact that Yitzhak had his bris when he was 8 days old wasn't because it wasn't inferior to Ishmael because he didn't even have a choice, so that it wasn't really valuable. It was the opposite. That was representative of the fact that Yitzhak's connection with Hashem was way deeper than something that's just a commitment we make with our heads. Right? Yes, when a person has Kabbalah soul, they don't make a decision each time. But that's not because they don't make decisions, it's because they've made a commitment that took their relationship somewhere way deeper than that. And all of this ties together. And as usual, we have 5 minutes to finish up 80% of the conversation. So how's all of this coming together? Yishmael was a normal person, born as a result of a regular, natural, situation in which Avram and Hagar were living together. And he was born. Happens all the time, every few seconds, maybe multiple times a second. I don't know the exact numbers, right? Happens all the time. So Yishmael was a normal person, natural. We make decisions, people make decisions, we think about things, and there is tremendous value to doing something because we thought about it and decided and committed. It's a huge deal. That being said, there are two things happening here, let's say downsides or shortfalls potentially. One is that it's high risk because we might also decide not to do the right thing, which Yishmael did do. High risk. There's a lot of risk. Did Yishmael agree to have a bris at 13? Yes. Did Yishmael always do the right thing? Not quite. Right? So doing the right thing voluntarily is immensely valuable. But number one, it leaves open the possibility that we might make the wrong decisions and we might do wrong things. Number two is whatever we're doing is coming from our mind and coming from our heart, our thoughts and our feelings and our decisions, which means that's how big and powerful it can be. Yitzhak's connection with Hashem was a whole different ballgame. Yitzhak, from the beginning, was something that Hashem gave specially to Abraham and Sarah, not by nature. It was a different ballgame. Yitzhak's whole story wasn't natural. Yitzhak wasn't part of nature. From the beginning, the idea of Yitzhak isn't even a part of nature. And when Yitzhak was born, because he was something that Hashem gave to Avram outside of nature, there was a very special, extra-natural, non-natural connection here. Right? If Yishmael could do all the right things all the time, and his connection to Hashem would increase and increase as he did those things. If he would do all the wrong things all the time, his connection with Hashem would decrease until it gets to zero. Yitzchak's connection to Hashem cannot be zero. Hashem created Yitzhak even as a concept before he was conceived physically, non-naturally. So something special that came from Hashem in a special, unique way. Directly from Hashem outside of nature. Yitzhak's connection to Hashem was something that was intrinsic by definition. Yes behaving, no behaving, irrelevant. The connection's there. Hashem made Yitzhak unnaturally. It's a different kind of thing. It's a different hardware. And that's expressed in the fact that Yitzhak had a bris at 8 days old. Yitzhak's connection to Hashem doesn't depend on his decisions. Good decisions, bad decisions, the connection is there by definition. So the bris that Yitzhak had involuntarily was an expression. Yitzhak didn't make the choice. He didn't agree. And especially because the right bris doesn't mean circumcision, the word bris. Milah means circumcision. Bris means covenant or oath, a pact. The bris was a pact between Hashem and Yitzhak that already existed before Yitzhak was even old enough to understand anything, because it was at the level of his nature, it was at the level of his hardware. He was created non-naturally. The pact and the connection between Hashem and Yitzhak existed by definition, intrinsically. And that's why Hashem said, I can't give you this with Yishmael. Yishmael's a natural child. Yishmael agreed to have a bris at 13, which is amazing, but it could go wrong. the connection between Hashem and Yishmael could go to zero. Hashem says, I'm giving you something which is different. The legacy you're going to leave comes through Yitzhak, comes through someone who was created outside of nature, whose connection to Hashem is beyond nature, beyond decisions, beyond good deeds, beyond bad deeds, beyond evil, beyond mistakes, beyond everything. And that's why Hashem said, and that's going to be expressed in the fact that the bris, the pact between Hashem and Yitzhak, is going to happen before decisions are even a part of Yitzhak's life. Because the connection between Yitzhak and Yitzhak's offspring and Hashem is something that is beyond decisions. It can never be hurt. It's eternal. And that's why Hashem told Avram. Avram said, what about Ishmael? Hashem said, no. Yishmael doesn't have the hardware for this. Yishmael wasn't created outside of nature with a bond to me that is by definition intrinsically irreversible and immortal. Thank you. This legacy has to come through someone whose connection to me is immortal intrinsically. And that's why Hashem said, I have to give you Yitzhak. We needed different hardware for this. Super quickly, two very, very quick lessons from this practically that the Rebbe brings at the end is number one, just appreciating what we have, the thing that's so special that it's beyond everything, it's intrinsic by definition. And number two is that because that's who we are and our connection with Hashem isn't based just on logic, whilst it's important to learn, to teach, to educate by logic and understanding and rationale, it's also important together with that to have a simultaneous approach of our connection with Hashem is not limited by logic and doesn't come from logic. And therefore, even from the very beginning, even from when a child's born, even from when a person starts learning about Yiddishkeit, there has to also be an element of this is not just rational. There's something beyond that here. There's Mesiras Nefesh, there's Kabbalah Soul, there's something that this is who we are and this is what we do and it's everything. And this is the definition of who we are. And if that's missing, there's a big part of the picture that's missing. Because otherwise, if it's just about understanding, doing, deciding, that's Yishmael. Hashem didn't need to write new hardware and give you time for that. Excuse me, L'chaim. Have a good week.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Rabbi.